Welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show. Today, we're going to go all the way to Southbury, Connecticut, and understand some key components today that these are conditions and terminology that I've never heard of. And today on the show, we're going to talk with a young lady that has suffered since COVID with this one particular topic. I think it's called POTS, but we'll get deeper into that and what it means and the effects that it has on her body, um, family, friends, relationship, the whole nine yards, and then talk about something else that I think is this is this is crazy. Today is about terminology. Let's call it what it is: word terminology, medical terminology. These are things I didn't even know in the medical terminology book in college, but it's called IPV. I'm not going to tell you what that means. I'm going to let her tell you what it means because she was a victim of this. And it really makes you wonder how many other people were victims of IPV. And I think the word, once again, is POTS. Um, this is a story about relentless pursuit to trying to save my own life. I'd like to welcome to the show all the way from Southbury, Connecticut, Reverend Julie Haas to the show. How you doing?
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Before we get into how the name Reverend came up, because that sure stood out. I'm like, when I saw the invite come, I was like, okay, what are you telling me here with the name Reverend? But before we get into that, tell the viewers a little bit about who Julie is.
Okay. Well, I'm a sober woman, so I've been sober almost 15 years. I was a dental hygienist for 20 years until I was pregnant with the birth of my third child, where I ended up bedridden with this weird medical condition that we're going to take a dive into.
Mhm.
Um, and that led me to investigate. I'm also a Reiki master. So I practice a form of energy medicine, Usui Reiki, and that really catapulted me into the mind body connection.
Mm,
Studying it, learning all about it, learning about how my mindset was affecting my outcome in the world and how I was possibly creating my reality with my mind. And so that's kind of how I got here. I attended seminary in sobriety, and that's a whole other topic, but never thought I'd be a minister, that's for sure. But ultimately, everything in my life has led me to this point here.
that's funny that you said creating our own reality. I tell people a good way of understanding that phrase is to watch The Matrix. You can't help but to understand reality than watching that movie. But let's go back.
Right.
Let's go back. You suffered something called IPV. What is that, and when did it first surface?
That's a great question. So, when people, IPV stands for intimate partner violence.
Hmm.
And, I always thought I'm a smart woman, I'm a tough cookie.
Mhm.
I would never be a victim of domestic violence. I wouldn't stand for it. Nobody's going to tell me what to do, so on and so forth. But it comes in many forms. And so I was a victim of coercive control. And that's really a continuous pattern of behavior that is intended to control or exert control over the victim. So it doesn't have to be, domestic violence does not have to be physical. And in fact, all forms of domestic violence, even the physical, start with coercive control, which is this pattern of regulating your movement, your restricting your free will, so on and so forth. But it's also very subtle and kind of there's a lot of nuances to it. So a lot of times the victims, including myself, have no idea that it's actually happening. It's more of a form of psychological and emotional abuse. And I was not aware of it until I ended up in therapy. Uh, and it was kind of brought to my attention. And honestly, I don't think I recognized it because the red flags didn't really seem so red. Like I said, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I grew up in a family that may not have had active alcoholism, but it's in our family tree. So there's still the patterns of behavior involved in alcoholism, even though there may not be active drinking.
Mhm.
And so I missed a lot of the things. It's not that I missed it, but they seem normal. They seem normal
Give me
compared
an
to my childhood.
give me an idea of, now that you've educated and it's been brought to light, the term IPV. What were some of the things that was used in the administration of this into your life? And then what was the red flags that now you look at and go, wow, because those red flags did seem normal because of you wasn't aware of what IPV was. Can you share that with us a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess one of the main ways was through guilt, through shame,
Hmm.
through fear, obligation, a lot of gaslighting, a lot of gaslighting. So there was a lot of confusion going on. Showing up as one thing, I love you. Of course, this is for your benefit. Let me trying to make my life easier is what it seemed like in the beginning, financially being there for me, doing things that maybe I would normally do for myself, where it's like, oh, wow, great, I can finally rely on someone. But it slowly became this trickle of where I was losing control in my own life, but it was under the guise of helping me or niceness or extreme jealousy, which I interpreted as love. God, he must love me so much.
Hmm.
He's so doesn't want anyone else to look at me, to have me, to be with me, for me to go out in the world. So, and there was a lot of codependency on my part. Watching the women in my family enabling a sick family system where usually one person is in control. And for my family of origin, that was my father. That was the men in the family, essentially.
What was that
So there's a
like growing up in your family? You mentioned alcoholism. You
lot.
mentioned some form of addiction, no matter what it is. But you thought this was normal. But what was it like growing up in there? Because that's usually the blueprint to moving forward anyway. The things that you encounter on a more intimate and close base. What was that like in your household?
Right. So, like I said, I never saw my family's European, French background. Alcohol was consumed, but not in excess by any means. We were taught to respect it.
Mhm.
So there was no, drug use or anything like that. My parents weren't passed out on the couch, but there were the isms of alcoholism. So we call it the isms. So there was, overspending, overeating, cheating, so it was, people were not attuned to the children. They were attuned to, their dopamine fixes outside of the family unit, whether it's, binge eating or spending money shopping or having affairs or sex addiction, stuff like that. That was the focus of the caregivers. It wasn't on the child. The child was expected to meet the parents' needs. So it's like everything is in reverse. My parents weren't attuned to me. I was hyper attuned to them to stay safe.
Give the viewers an idea of what that's like as a child to be in tune with dysfunction parents, because that's pretty much what that is. But what was that like as a child, if you can remember what that was like for you? Take us through some of those steps.
Sure. Well, a lot of my memories were suppressed and repressed. So I did not have a lot of childhood memories.
Mhm.
Um, I've since regained a lot of them through my trauma therapy that I've engaged in. But I always was very hyper attuned to, other people's emotions. So what we would call today an empath, really sensitive to like minute changes in someone else's behavior. And, for my whole adult life, I thought, oh, I'm so caring of other people, and I just like I care too much almost, but really, and to my own detriment. Over caring without boundaries is suicidal in a sense. But I was not permitted to have healthy boundaries of my own thoughts, my own space in my house. So even little things like that, to where I couldn't close my bedroom door, I couldn't have a lock on it, I couldn't have my own thoughts, challenge anything that challenged the belief system of the family. I really had to be hyper attuned to what type of mood my family members were in so that I could stay safe. And so I could somehow keep the peace. I was very much the peacekeeper between my parents, and kind of like the family therapist in a sense. And for my whole life, I thought, oh, well, I just had a really close relationship, with my dad, maybe, or because I was very close with my father more so than my mother. But it took me until my mother's death, really 2 years ago, to see that I was actually kind of pitted against my mother and triangulated to maintain the power so my father could maintain the power. And I didn't see that until honestly it happened in my own marriage. And I thought, am
Give
I
me,
my mother
give me,
now?
an,
No,
give
this
me,
wasn't happening.
give me an example. You said this happened into your own marriage. That's what I was talking about. Sometimes these breadcrumbs start here and we don't really see it. So how did you know that you was becoming like your mom and this is your first marriage, correct?
No, this is my second marriage that I'm talking about, the father of my 9-year-old. So I became very ill during the marriage. I became bedridden during the pregnancy of my third daughter.
Mm.
And I started to notice somewhere along the lines, I mean, I was just exhausted. I was hyper functioning, over functioning in a sense, yet bedridden, but really always just worrying about other people's needs. I felt angry. I felt resentful. I felt like my husband was telling me one thing behind closed doors, like, oh, you've got to get the kids to do this, this, and this, or, being very upset with certain things that were going on. Yet he would then take them out and, buy them material things. And so there was like this cognitive dissonance between what he was telling me behind closed doors and how he was treating the children. And then it was creating this subtle sort of uh, I guess resentment between, myself and my children because, it was in a very guised form. So he would complain like, "Oh, you've got to, talk to your daughters about it or to your son or whatever about not being late and this and that." And I would stress out, "Oh my God," because I'd feel guilty because here this man is coming into my family unit and helping me raise these children. But then next thing you know, he's like rewarding them in some weird sense, and then it would create this weird triangulation where we were pitted against each other. It's a coercive control is a really difficult thing to explain. It is a very subtle form of, it's not direct, like, oh, you should hate your mother, she's XYZ. It's in the form of statements like, oh God, it's too bad that mom can't XYZ, just planting seeds of doubt almost in the children, or seeds of like, oh, I know it's so hard when, mom is so angry. Meanwhile, the kids aren't seeing that I've just dealt with, 4 hours of questioning and a sleepless night, all because who knows, some perceived threat to the marriage or so on and so forth. So there was a lot going on behind the scenes, and then I would kind of show up in this frazzled state. I was exhausted, I was overwhelmed, I was frazzled, but yet no one's really understanding why I'm so frazzled. There's a lot of gaslighting going on, if you're familiar with that term. So there was a lot of mental confusion. And honestly, a lot of women that kind of emerge from these situations appear, quote, crazy. And that plays into the perpetrator's plan because that's how we show up. But really, it's nervous system dysregulation.
Now, you talked about your second husband, but what part of these traits were going on during your first marriage? Because your kids are now from the oldest are 21 to 25. So that means
Right.
you've been in that relationship for quite some time because you went from your household into this marriage. What was that like as far as the IPV and really trying to understand the whole purpose? Because I'm pretty sure this surfaced up here before it went to the second marriage. What was it like with the first marriage?
Oh, sure. Well, there was no healthy, functional relationships prior to me, getting sober and doing all this work. And even in sobriety, you're patterned we're wired, so to speak, to recreate these dynamics from childhood, whether we want to look at it or not. And so I wouldn't say that there was intimate partner violence with that marriage, but we were both very active in our addiction and our alcoholism. So it was very dysfunctional. It was very mutually abusive. There is no open communication and healthy ways of relating when you're in active addiction. So there was a lot of neglect and so on and so forth of our own emotional needs, of our children's emotional needs, a lack of attunement to each other and to our children. And this is all um not to feel bad or guilty about it, but it's like you can't pass on what you were never given until you bring that awareness into your life and actively work to fix it. It's one thing to know something, but it's something else to be able to put it into action. And that's where this whole nervous system regulation came in.
Did you, how can I put this? They sometimes say opposites attract when it comes to relationships. But when you hear stories of addiction, and it seems like that they attract each other, was did that even a did he show signs of addictions? Because I don't know, and I'm glad you recovered. So I'm trying to ask so I can educate myself. How can two people with the same addiction problems flourish is what I'm trying to say. And then more importantly, how are you going to really be able to raise children constructively when either you don't realize you have an addiction problem or you try to camouflage the addiction problem by saying I can handle it? And more importantly, do you do you both sit back and see the impact that you both are creating, not only for yourself as a couple, but what you're doing for the impact you're having on your kids as well as the people that are around you?
Yeah, those are great questions. Those are great questions. Well, first of all, everyone's got their own path and free will. So ideally, you want both people in recovery. It's not a question of just putting down the drink, it's a question of both people being in recovery. It's impossible to raise children to not carry on the legacy of addiction unless you stop, address it, accept it, address it, come out of denial. And it is a family system. So, where there's one person in active addiction or two people in active addiction, there is also this whole family system that's built around that person that's in addiction
Mhm.
to enable them to stay safe. And it's very sick. And so, my ex-husband, his mother was an alcoholic. In my family, I did not see, like I said, my parents drink or drug, but they were involved in other ways of escaping. And that's really what it is, escaping reality, trying to numb the pain. But there was alcoholism in my grandparents. So I think it takes really, in order to flourish and to raise children to feel happy, confident, and safe and secure and not have any mental health issues, you're going to have to put down the drink or drug. And actually, it's more than that. It's going into a program. For me, it was the 12 steps to actively change your belief system and your patterns and dysfunctional ways of relating.
What was your
Because,
belief? What was your belief system?
oh, what was my belief system?
Because clearly you seen you had to grow up and be put in the position in your household to grow up and to take care of your parents. You kind of seen the blueprint of what they were doing, the COVID operations to numb pain, whether it was through alcohol leading to infidelity, to this, to that, and other. But the bottom line is, what was your pain? What was and what were you afraid of? What were you afraid of?
Everything. Quite simply, everything. I remember a deep sense of fear as a child because there was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of, my parents were very social. So I always thought, oh, my parents are very social. We had a lot of parties, they had a lot of dinner parties, and there was a lot of travel. I traveled throughout Europe. My parents were in the fashion industry. So I was, often an adult a child in an adult's world. And I was deeply lonely. There was no one who was attuned to me. And by attuned, I mean who actually held space, who looked me eye to eye, gave me eye contact and said, "You're okay," and filled me with confidence and a sense of belonging. Instead, I felt I was scapegoated a lot as a child. And because I was kind of like the truth seer, and that doesn't go very well in a family of a bunch of adults acting out in their own sort of numbing processes.
Hmm.
So they tried to shut that down. The child that speaks up and asks the questions that threaten the family system. And of course, like a lot of girls, I was a victim and survivor of sexual abuse as a child, where I wasn't helped or saved or believed or protected. That has profoundly affected me and my nervous system and my intimate relationships. So it was a very painful, lonely childhood.
Was the encounter sexually, was it with somebody that you knew, and how old were you?
It was with someone that I knew, and then it was with someone that I did not know. It was all before the age of 12 and under. Um, and it was actually someone who was it was a family friend a family friend that I called my uncle, even though he wasn't my uncle. His daughter was my best friend growing up, and they were very, very, very religious. My family was not religious, but that had a profound effect on my connection to God and a higher power for my whole adult life.
You said you shared these things as a child with your family members. Well, how was it met with?
Um, there was a lack of belief and insinuation that I was lying. I was not removed from a situation. Another incident took place at camp when I was a child and sent up to camp in Canada, and I was not taken out of the camp when I reported it. In fact, I was left there for several weeks following, and so I kind of had to dig my heels in and stop showering and stop bathing and brushing my teeth so I could get my parents' attention so that they would take me home. And that's a desperate, desperate attempt to be saved from a very unsafe, scary situation as a 12-year-old.
I'm deeply sorry that happened. I'm even more um, disappointed that your parents questioned you, not not only during the first time, but multiple times, and you was put back in that environment. Do you think it was because, did your parents trust this perpetrator that much, or was it the fact that the perpetrator used religion as an scapegoat to amplify his predatorial actions?
I don't think that the religious piece facilitated it from my parents' standpoint because they are not religious. So that really had nothing to do with it for them. For me as a child, it was very deeply confusing um, because that was my first experience with organized religion. And it was all under this kind of shame, fear, obligation, and guilt. What would a good Christian do, and so on and so forth. So I think I can't speak for my parents. I don't know what the situation was as far as that, but I know that there's a thick layer. I can only imagine that because they never had parents that were attuned to them and they grew up in dysfunction where there was abuse and neglect and trauma, and that's this generational legacy of trauma that we inherit from generations. So they didn't have the wiring, the neurological wiring to save me and to meet me where I was at, because they had not had it done for them. They had experienced the same thing. So there's this sense of, normalcy. Like,
It's almost like the roller pigeon theory as it comes to relating to what you've just gone through, genetic hardwiring. Let's move forward a little bit here. When did you decide? What was the final? You wind up getting married to your first husband, and you seeing. Well, I don't even know if you're seeing it yet, but what was the final straw that made you walk away from that relationship?
I got sober. I got sober, and you get sober, and one person decides to get sober, and the other person doesn't, and it's kind of a no brainer. I had to
Share.
leave to save my life.
Did you share with your partner that you? How did you bring it to your partner that you was on the road, that you wanted to seek treatment? How was it met with when you shared that with your first husband?
I think he was supportive at the time because I think I was more engaged in I was further along in the addictive process than he was at the time. So I think he was supportive, but ultimately, while I was in rehab, he was still actively drinking. When I came home, he was still actively drinking, and it wasn't something that he wanted to give up, because he didn't think really he had a problem, or whatever the reason is. I can't really speak to that because it was a long time ago, but it boils down to he did not want to stop, and I could not be in an environment where someone that I drank with, was going to continue, and I was going to be in that same home environment with alcohol. It just was impossible to stay sober.
How was it affecting your children at the time? And how did when did you acknowledge to them that or did you acknowledge to them that you was going to go get help for what was going on? What was that kind of
Yeah.
between you two?
Well, my children at the time were very young. I went into my first rehab when my son was about 3 years old, and my daughter was like 7. So they were very, very young. But ultimately, when I did get sober, and it took me a long time. I mean, I went into that first rehab in 2007, and ultimately, it took me 3 years of being in recovery in AA, multiple detoxes and rehabs to finally get sober. It took a while, but they were there the whole time. I was dragging them to meetings with me. I had no choice, that was the priority. And I was willing to do whatever it took to get sober and to stay sober. And I am really grateful that they were raised in AA, because my oldest, my 25-year-old, is a social worker now,
Mhm.
and my son's in college right now, majoring in psychology. So, I'm trying to stop that generational pattern of trauma, of addiction, and say, hey, it stops with me. And I'm very upfront and open with my children about that.
You said that it took you 3 years of trials and tribulations. So I take it there were moments that you, what they call it, maybe fell off the wagon or whatever they say. What do you think made you fall off the wagon? Because you went there for help, and my hats off to you for doing that. To recognize and put action behind the problem is deserves some congratulations. But when you're dealing with any form of addiction, it's still a mental process that's not easily an off and on switch. What were some of the things that you had to deal with that made the 3 years an off and on switch for you, going off and on the wagon and blah blah blah. I'm thinking, I'm thinking now, I'm thinking that maybe you changed that part of the narrative by seeking treatment, but I think the handicap was you was probably still trying to change somebody else that wasn't ready to be changed, or more or less keep the household together, because of the intuitive nature of caring. So I'll let you tell me if that's true or false.
Okay, so no, it wasn't really that. It was that I was not at that point. I had decided, to get sober, but I could not stay sober. And um, what made me relapse every time? Well, I mean, first of all, at that point, those 3 years, I wasn't able to get more than maybe 5 days together with any clean time. So I could not put more than 5 days together in a row
Wow.
staying sober. And, it was anything would cause me to relapse, because by that point I was so patterned and ingrained to, I didn't know how to live life on life's terms. I had no idea how to live life on life's terms. So whether it was something happy or joyful that happened or something sad or miserable, everything involved alcohol. I didn't know how to regulate my own emotions. I had no emotional regulation. And that doesn't just, you don't just get sober and all of a sudden you're, Zen like and you can regulate your emotions and you know how to live life on life's terms.
Mhm.
Putting down the drink is the very first step, but that is just the beginning. Just the beginning. And 14, almost 15 years into sobriety now, I still feel like a beginner.
Really? So
Yeah.
congratulations on the 15 years of sobriety. I know that, um, just looking at your story, that's been a journey. So let's move forward a little bit. So then you wind up uh, remarrying, um, the birth of your third child. Then all of a sudden, COVID happens. Did you catch COVID? First of all, did you have? So you caught COVID. I take it in order to get to this next phase that we're talking about, and I think that is the illness is called. Did I get it right? Is it POTS? Did I say it right?
It's called POTS, which stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It's a form of dysautonomia, which means a dysregulation of your autonomic nervous system. And I just want to stress that for me, I didn't get dysautonomia or POTS during COVID, but a lot of people did. They ended up with long COVID or POTS after COVID. And that for me was extremely exciting because it brought awareness to my form of dysautonomia that I have. So before COVID, people had really never heard of POTS.
Hmm.
It took me years to get a diagnosis, but I was having these weird symptoms that were multi-systemic. So I was having a lot of neurological symptoms. I was having a lot of cardiac symptoms. I was having a lot of GI symptoms. So it was throughout my body. And the problem is that being a woman, going to doctors, different doctors. I've got these issues. I've got, cognitive problems. I've got dizziness and vertigo. I've got something's going on with my heart. Oh my God, my stomach. I can't eat. If it's multi-systemic, meaning it involves, different systems of the body, that is going to make you more likely to get a diagnosis of, hypochondria or, mental health disorder rather than doctors realizing that it's actually a disorder that involves the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is the longest nerve running from our mouth all the way down to our genitals. And so everything along the vagus nerve is affected. And that's why there's so many different symptoms. But a lot of people waste time going to different doctors, different specialists, treating the symptoms, not realizing that it's on the vagus nerve. This is all vagus nerve related. And now, in the field of trauma and addiction, especially trauma, we're really seeing this huge awareness now, with neurology and the nervous system and how it affects us and the vagus nerve, and realizing that a lot of mental health states depression, anxiety. They're just dysregulated states of our nervous system, chronic pain, so on and so forth. So POTS is actually very, very common, but until COVID, no one had ever heard of it.
How in the heck did you even know
Mm.
which doctors to even go to, and why did it take so long to get the right diagnosis?
That is a great question. So thank God, I love science. I love science. Like I said, I was a dental hygienist for over 20 years. So I was very science based. I wasn't into this kind of, woo woo spiritual stuff. And I was very, very, very sick. And I started to research my own symptoms because I could not get a diagnosis. And honestly, it was as simple as plugging into a Google search. I only feel good laying down because there was something so specific that was happening. As soon as I sat up, stood up, I felt violently ill. My stomach would cramp up. All the symptoms would present itself. My heart was making all these, feeling terrible. And then as soon as I would lay down, it was like this instantaneous relief. And that I Googled that and POTS came up. And I started to read about POTS and I said, oh my God, this is what I've got. I know it. This is to a T. People were describing exactly what I felt like. So I asked my doctor at that time, this is what I think I have. And she led me to a doctor in Bridgeport who is a cardiac electrophysiologist, I believe. He did a tilt table test. So they strap you to a table and they slowly bring that table from a horizontal position up to a vertical, and they're measuring your heart rate and your blood pressure. And that's what got me my diagnosis, which was great, but that didn't mean that there was anyone around that knew how to fix it.
I was getting
And
ready to
so
ask you, how did they fix it?
Right. So that took multiple trips out to Cleveland Clinic in Ohio,
Mhm.
which is like Mayo Clinic, an amazing, amazing, amazing facility where there are doctors who are taking into account, all these different symptoms and putting the pieces together. So they're not just working on, their one system, the nervous system, neurological, or, GI, but they're looking at everything that's going on. And I did a whole cardiac rehabilitation program, which they do for astronauts when they've been up in space and they've been not, involved with gravity, and they come back to Earth, and all of a sudden their bodies have a hard time adjusting to the gravity. And so I had to start with this little peddler, like old people use, when you're bedridden. And it was this portable peddler, and I did recumbent exercises where my sympathetic nervous system wasn't engaged. And then I slowly moved to upright exercises, but it was a whole cardiac rehabilitation program. And that was really just the beginning. That kind of enabled me to walk again and stand for prolonged periods of time. Um, but it's been a journey. It's really been a journey. It was still very active, and that's where I got into the trauma work, and that has been amazing, and it's been hugely impactful in managing my POTS.
You mentioned all this rehab was done at the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, I was treated with a heart when my first case of angina was diagnosed at the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. A great group of cardiovascular specialists. They are my hats off to them. They're really good. But my question is, how many people have actually been diagnosed with this? Did they share any data with you? Like, you can't be the only one. We mentioned the astronauts, but how many other people probably walk around with this and with these symptoms and have no idea um, that it's something as simple as what you said, the Venus um, um,
Vagus
pathway,
nerve.
the vagus nerve. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dr. Gabor Mate, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, he's been really instrumental, one of the many, in bringing the awareness of the dysautonomia and the dysregulation of the nervous system. But honestly, it is a rarely known disorder, but it is not rare. There are millions of people that are suffering. And a lot of the symptoms involved in a lot of chronic health conditions, Parkinson's, MS, cancer, RA, you name it, the symptoms are arising from the dysregulation of the nervous system or the vagus nerve involvement, and that's what's causing it. And when people learn to regulate their nervous system, then they realize that, oh, wow, a lot of these symptoms that were present aren't debilitating or have minimized. So it's becoming more and more aware, in the general public. It's not only astronauts, that's for sure. It is showing up in all different states.
How do you now deal with the trauma aspects of your life as it relates to all of the nerve endings that has been affected with the alcoholism, the molestation, all these all these traumas really take a toll on a person's body, whether they think so or not. It does have long lasting effects. So because it does have long lasting effects, what's your treatment plan moving forward? What are you doing now to treat all of this long term trauma and the diagnosis from the Vegas pathway, the whole 9 yards?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think now there's a lot of awareness into the ACE scores, the adverse childhood experiences, and how it predisposes you to chronic health conditions and to pain and so on and so forth. For me, I had done talk therapy on and off throughout my entire life, and I was still having these issues. And it wasn't until I read that book, The Body Keeps the Score, that I really started to think about, hey, maybe there's more to this. How can I access this, maybe suppressed trauma or repressed trauma? Because it wasn't something that I could sit down in therapy and talk about. It was almost pre-verbal. A lot of it was 0 to 6 when the wiring of your brain is going on. So it wasn't something that I could just kind of sit down with a therapist, talk about and resolve and leave and feel better. But I had to figure out, how am I going to access this? And that was where I was in seminary. It was my first year. My first year seminary dean was also a social worker, by the grace of God. I mean, so she read a lot of my papers and she said, hey, you might want to go get some trauma therapy. I think you would benefit from internal family systems. And I said, what? Internal family systems? What's that? And she kind of pointed me in the path of this different form of therapy, where I wasn't talking, but I was using sound, and I was meditating and EMDR and brain spotting and all these somatic body based therapies, where you're not going to talk it out, but you're going to get it out of your body. Because you're right, the trauma, the wiring, it's stored in our bodies. And that's where I'm dealing with it, is through somatic practices. Like I said, I'm a Reiki master, so I incorporate a lot of Reiki into my own healing. I just finished a certificate program through the Embody Lab on integrative somatic trauma healing, so that even things like dancing or chanting or meditating or prayer, I started to notice in seminary, wow, that's weird. When I'm meditating and chanting and praying, my POTS actually feels better. How is this related?
Mhm.
So I started to kind of take a deep dive into the mind body connection, and how we can resolve those issues between the mental processes and our physical health, even when it's not something that you can necessarily talk about.
What made you decide to get in to be a master of Reiki?
Well, getting sober started my spiritual journey. That was really the beginning of my spiritual program, because that's what AA is, and the 12 steps. And somewhere along the line, I think I just was very, my mom was kind of like an old hippie. She loved, talking about these, magnets and energy and so on and so forth. And I guess she got into my head a little deeper than I realized, because next thing you know, I was taking my level 1 Reiki, and I started to see profound results, I think, with my own depression and anxiety, because at the time I was sober, but I was still suffering with a lot of anxiety and depression that I used alcohol to manage, and not very well. And then I got my level 2, and then I got my level 3, became a master, and of course, my POTS did get better, but there was still a lot going on. And that's when I attended seminary. And I had that first year dean point me into the pathway of trauma therapy and all these sort of body based ways of rewiring my brain and my nervous system. And I've been on that path ever since. And I've seen just the most profound effects of this work for myself and for the clients that I deal with. I deal with a lot of women, mostly women, in recovery, whether they're recovering from addiction or unhealthy relationships or unhealthy patterns with food, shopping, men, whatever. They're using stuff to numb.
It seems as if a lot of what are you finding the same stories with the people that you're working with? Because I always tell people we're all connected. So if we're all connected, the stories, the trauma, the trials, the tribulations is only going to be less than a sugar cube away from the connection, which means out of all of that, we all have that connection. You're teaching the art of energetic um, healing, but during the same process, you're hearing stories. How similar are everybody's stories to one another in their trauma journey?
I mean, the facts of the stories and the specifics may be different, but ultimately they're all the same stories. And they're really just other people that want to be seen and heard. Everyone wants to be seen and heard. And it's amazing the results that we can get by just holding space for someone and allowing them to be seen and heard for quite honestly the first time in their lives.
Hmm. I'm gonna close this out by allowing you to share with the viewers what should your message be? What message are you trying to deliver to the audience? Because your road is definitely a beast mindset. I mean, from having dealing with IPV, dealing with POTS, the beautiful journey of recovery, and then the spiritual, universal enlightenment of your life and helping others. What's your end game message to the viewers?
It's a great question. Well, I really want to offer hope. I think hope, hold on, pain ends. Such a great acronym for that word. Because that's what it starts with. If you don't have hope, forget it. So
Right.
it's like if you could just have a mustard seed worth of hope, then that is the doorway that will open, and watch how your life can change, because none of us are stuck.
Mhm.
None of us are stuck where we are. And
Eh,
we all have a profound ability to heal. Our bodies know how to heal.
Greek mythology put it pretty simple. When the box was opened, the entities put one last thing in that box, and it was called hope. And definitely, you're definitely giving people that inspiration. How can the viewers reach out to you, learn more about what you do, and more importantly, bring the message of hope to you and hope that they can collaborate to get to where you're at?
Great. Well, I do offer online coaching sessions and in person. I'm available at faithfullydriven.com, and they can look me up there. I'm also on Instagram at Faithfully Driven Life, or on Facebook. And yeah,
Julie, thank you so much for taking time out to come and share such a beautiful story. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you subscribe, follow, support her. All it takes is one click to make you connected to one person that can change your life. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Crayton Show.